Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello everybody, welcome to our Wednesday, the Leading Change episode, this week with Usman Kotwal. Hi Usman, welcome back.
Hello.
So on Wednesdays, we talk about one of the things that we most spend our time and our thinking time on, which is how to enact change. Now, it could be a personal level change, could be our own change, could be the team's change, could be an organizational level change. There's all kinds of change processes going on when it comes to the work of the Scrum Master. So we want you to dive into one of those processes that you were involved with, and walk us through how that happened. Like what were the things happening, the events, the conversations, the problems, but of course the successes as well. And we want you to especially highlight for us the tips, the tricks, the techniques, and the tools you learned back then that you still apply today.
I'm gonna set this up in two ways because I learned these kind of skills at different parts, and then they helped me very much as a Scrum Master. So one was as a consultant. One thing that I realized quickly on is it didn't make sense to ask for work. Instead, it made sense to at times just work out scenarios and ideas, just present them, and then be like, okay, which of these things do you prefer the most? Which led to easier and a lot quicker decision making. Because at times people were like, if I asked them, hey, what should I be working on? What do we need to do here? The people themselves felt very much overwhelmed. And I think the good job of a consultant is to take this feeling of being overwhelmed away. And as I realized, this is something that really helps a good Scrum Master, because to a degree, a Scrum Master is a consultant too. The other thing I also learned during the same time was specificity.
What do you mean by that?
So if you talk about something and then set something up, be as specific as possible. As in, who does it? When is it done? What is the outcome? How will it be measured? How do we know it has been successful? And these kind of things, which seem basic and are part of a lot of retrospectives. But I've also often seen that people don't fully utilize it, or they skip over this part. And I felt like, this is the one part you cannot skip over. It's better to maybe reduce the scope of what you're talking about, but keep this part, as specific as possible. So where was I able to use that one? I was working as a Scrum Master in a company. So I came again from a different company as a service, more or less. What they needed or what they wanted was someone who had a bit of experience when it comes to scaling. And at that point, I did have a bit of experience. It was a lot of experience through osmosis, to be fair, but it was experience nonetheless. And the idea was they had 10 development teams at that time, and they were working on one really large enterprise product. It was for the pharmaceutical industry, so you had a lot of different regulations going on. You had lots of GXP relevancy, which meant like, okay, you need specific processes in the company because otherwise you wouldn't get FDA approved. And if you don't get FDA approved, well, your business model is gone. Let's say that way. So they were always erred on being too strict to have a chance. And then the question came, okay, how can we make sure that now that there are 10 development teams, that we find ways of working which makes sure that alignment is easy and understood, and that the team knows what we're working towards, and figure out on how we can work towards that goal. So one of the reasons that the management wanted to have me is because I had experience in SAFe. I didn't tell them that SAFe was not something I'm very fond of. I just smiled and I was like, sure, I know a thing or two. And so we got into it, got to know a lot of different product owners and Scrum Masters, and obviously amazing developers and testers. And I was to be working with the other Scrum Masters on working out and on how to scale. How do we set up the processes? And I was always a big fan of keeping it as lean as possible and keeping it as small as possible, and only be scaling if it's absolutely necessary, and if possible, reducing complexity first. But at the same time, there were others who had ideas for, let's say, pretty big scaling, let's say, frameworks, and then just basically trying to start to implement them. And honestly, I wouldn't have minded if I thought that this would have been good in the first place. But in the end, it's a collaborative effort and we should be working on it together. And we did. So how did my skills, come into it? Well, whenever we talk about these kind of things, it at times, when you have people who are very process heavy, it at times can get a bit philosophical, which is nice, which at times, however, is the biggest enemy of working well. So whenever we got to an end of a meeting, I try to be specific, try to summarize again, get to specific points, and also try to focus on what were the action items and who and when and how should those be followed through, and how do we know that these action items were valuable and the outcome, the desired outcome was achieved. This kind of gave a different beat to it, because all of a sudden the other Scrum Masters, got it into their mind too, because that's how they have been working
And
too.
it sounds to me that this is also a very effective way to do what you were talking about a minute ago, which is to kind of try to remove complexity first by making things very specific, which kind of, it removes the fog of the labels and the structures and so on. And it helps to get out of this, I would say, the anti-pattern of being mesmerized by the complexity of the scaling framework of your choice. And it kind of turns things, which I have to say I learned from project management, turns things into tasks that we can check if they were done, right? Like, this is not always where you want to start, but if you want to remove complexity, it can be a very effective tool.
Absolutely. And absolutely. I also think that, for instance, research is something that can be a task if we have an idea on where it's going to, or even figuring out which direction we want to go to is a task if we think about it. For sometimes what it was is it was almost just, say, a round of people getting together, and it became almost a religious battleground of different ideas. That was just not very helpful. And specificity exactly did that. It led to a reduction of complexity, and it turned things which felt like almost ephemeral, almost untouchable, almost like, just ideas somewhere in the room, into something more tangible. And that I thought was really interesting to see, because I just did it because I didn't always understand everything. I was like, cool, but what does it mean if I want to do it? Because I'm a person who I don't understand things a lot of times. So I need to ask a lot. And at times I need to ask a lot of follow-up questions just to feel like I get an understanding. But at times this can also be really helpful for other people.
I was just thinking that this idea, this tip, the tool of making things very specific also goes very well with your other suggestion of presenting multiple options for choices.
Exactly. So this, in this case, also went hand in hand, as you just said out loud. And that is, in the end, what we had was like, okay, we were tasked when it comes to scaling. It's not really our decision to be made, because we wanted to make sure that everyone else also has an input and realize, okay, this is something they want to see. And the options we were in the beginning, they were like, okay, maybe we want to present those frameworks, and the idea was a different one, which didn't come from me, by the way, it came from someone else, and that was, or we just look at specific actions, and then we propose specific actions to the teams as experiments, and then move on forward, which is, a really simple thing to do, and it should be the first thing a Scrum Master thinks of, thinking of, hey, maybe we should do an organizational experiment. But if you're in a bigger room and you talk strategy, those ideas sometimes get lost. And I can feel how strategy consultants also feel when they come with outlandish ideas, because, you forget to test the waters. And coming up with specific ideas and realizing, hey, we want to try this and this and this out, or this and this or this, and you take a look at it, what would you feel most comfortable with? It made it really easy for the teams to be like, well, those three sound sensible, but this one actually makes more sense due to this and this. And if that doesn't work, we can still try something else. And with this, we got to action really quickly. And since we made sure that these options were very specific, it also meant that the people knew what they were getting into.
Not only that, but I would venture even to add to that, that they were not only aware of what they were getting into, but they were given a choice, that even though it was constrained, it was still a choice. And they had to verbalize their commitment to whatever course of action they wanted to take.
Yeah. And I think those two things helped me a lot, because it worked with the teams, it worked with management, who more than anyone needed a choice of options to make quick decisions. And to me, it just made work a lot easier, because when I look at it, those kind of things, they work on me too. If someone comes to me and is specific and has three options, let's say a friend for a dinner, well, first of all, I'm delighted, because I think like, hey, thanks for doing all that work. Thanks for thinking of me. And those are 3 great options. Thanks for giving me the choice. And this fully makes it a lot more delightful to work at.
Absolutely. And a great tip for a change process. Thank you for sharing that, Usman.
My pleasure.
Leading change is one of the core skills we must acquire, but it is only one of the steps towards our success as Scrum Masters. Tomorrow, on Success Thursday, we will talk about how to define success for the Scrum Master role. We'll cover tips on how to measure your way to that position, and most importantly, how to develop that focus on continuous improvement that is as important for Scrum Masters as it is for teams. See you tomorrow. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.